morning and welcome to Rising. We are charting out into the unknown for another episode of our news show. Good morning, Briahna.
Good morning, Robby. Was that a Dune reference?
No, I was thinking of other things, but I did see Dune this weekend, as did you.
I did. How could I be your partner in this job, know that I was going to show up and sit next to you all week and not prioritize seeing Dune, Robby?
So all I want to do, obviously, is talk about it all show. We won't do that. I did think it was very good. I was struck by some changes. They did actually change more substantially aspects of the plot than they did the first film, but it is as good as promised, and I will be seeing it again this week.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that at all, Robby. But here, back on Earth, we have some news for you. It seems President Joe Biden isn't just competing against Donald Trump this election season. He's also competing against a perhaps more formidable opponent, his own age. NBC's Saturday Night Live poked fun at the commander-in-chief this weekend.
He said, "We gotta tighten this border. Look how easy I can cross it." Then he parkoured up to the top of the border wall. He front flipped into the Rio Grande and came back up with a fish in his mouth. But you didn't report that because it doesn't fit your little narrative.
Well, with all due respect, it doesn't fit reality.
Meanwhile, HBO host Bill Maher had some advice for the aging president.
Stop with the "I'm sharper than ever." Nobody's buying that. Don't try to deny the age thing. Lean into it. Lean in. Lean in like you're eating soup. Next Thursday, when the president delivers the State of the Union, I say he should let his old fart flag fly.
All joking aside, voters' anxieties are at an all-time high when it comes to Biden's age. A New York Times Siena College poll released on Saturday shows a majority of respondents who support 81-year-old Joe Biden do think that he's too old to lead the country effectively. 47% reported that they strongly agreed, and 26% they somewhat agreed with that observation. Now, according to the poll, 21% strongly agree and somewhat agree Donald Trump's age, 77 years old, is also a problem. However, Trump is sitting undeniably pretty compared to Biden. The New York Times reports that the GOP frontrunner has the biggest national lead in the outlet's polling since 2015 when he first ran. Per the New York Times, Biden is not simply behind Trump, but he's trailing in key states worth well more than 270 electoral votes. So here we are at this moment in time where things are not improving for Joe Biden. These were a pair of really indicting New York Times stories. Majority of Biden's own voters saying he is too old to be effective. Yeah. Making this, and what the New York Times observed is that this race is just becoming fundamentally unlike the dynamics in 2020, where there was one very unpopular candidate and one that was broadly more acceptable to a wide swath of the electorate. Now you have two candidates who are both unpopular. Yeah. The call, I've never heard this expression before. It's rare for us, I think, to learn a new political term. The double haters, people who dislike both candidates. Sign us up for the double haters movement, right, Briahna?
If there is one double hater, I will stand among them. Yeah, no, look, this is pretty damning for a couple of reasons. Look, we've been seeing polls since the end of last year that showed something like 70% of the Democratic Party electorate didn't want Joe Biden to be the candidate. And now it's getting worse because people who once supported Joe Biden are increasingly believing that he's not going to be an effective leader, largely because of these age concerns. Now, I would say I think these polls insisting on framing this question around age gives Democrats a kind of opportunity to delude themselves into thinking, well, Trump is old too, so isn't it all the same thing? But it doesn't seem to be really about age when you push a little deeper and you look at the framing of the effective to lead question. That, I think, is getting to questions about physical stamina, mental competence, et cetera. And those are traits that aren't equally distributed between Donald Trump or Joe Biden, or at least aren't perceived to be distributed equally in that way. Donald Trump, regardless of his chronological age, comes off more robust than Joe Biden. The nature of his flubs don't seem to be as related to sort of cognitive fitness as opposed to maybe basic ignorance or, his kind of puffery that he very commonly has. And so Biden is in a unique situation, and I think that is why chatter about what may or may not happen at a convention, whether or not there's going to still be time to swap in an alternative to Joe Biden, is getting hotter and hotter as the weeks go on.
Well, it's also with Trump, it's just, whatever you think of him, plenty of people think the things he says are crazy, but there hasn't been a major change in how he delivers, how his personality works, the kind of things he says in the last, 10 years, the whole time he's been on the political scene. Yeah. He sounds pretty much himself, whereas with Joe Biden, you see he's been on the political scene longer, but you see he's different from when he ran
in 2020,
and way different from when he was vice president under Obama. Some people have been paying attention to politics for a longer time. He's been in politics for decades and decades, and he is showing decline, and it's just unavoidable.
Yeah, I do think the State of the Union is going to be an important test ground for him. Remember, he had a very good moment for him when he had to respond to an interjection from the crowd and seemed to pick up on it and make a little kind of joke about it and seem like strong on his feet. Those kind of moments are really good for him. The question is, are we going to see more of that from the State of the Union, or are we going to see the kind of performance we saw in the press conference where it went out for the very purpose of trying to assuage people's concerns about his age following the Her report and ended up inadvertently mixing up the president of Egypt and the president of Mexico?
Yeah, it shouldn't ultimately be a hard task. The State of the Union is reading a speech being interrupted every 7 words for your people to applaud you. It's kind of a sycophantic display, frankly. But I do agree with you. He did a good job at it last time. Didn't he? He ended up daring Republicans. And he did go off script a little bit, daring Republicans to cut.
Social Security, right?
Saying, "Oh, so you're not actually going to cut it? Okay, I guess we all agree." Yeah, and it was clearly a successful moment. It was frankly Joe Biden at his best. Maybe the last time we saw him perform well in front of a crowd when the cameras are in his face. So I know more people are going to be watching the State of the Union this year, probably because their minds aren't made up. They don't want Trump back. That's what they're saying in polls. But they don't trust Biden to be able to do the job of president necessarily anymore, given his age. And, given other things you mentioned, the whole progressive wing of the party is obviously very upset with him over a lot of policies, the perceived as failed promises, and, of course, what's going on in the Middle East. So it's a tough time.
In some ways, the age is just the tip of the iceberg. I do want to ask you specifically about the 2 clips that we played, because both are getting at this idea that the Democrats' strategy for how to address his age is not successful. The SNL clip pointing out that Democrats keep putting people forward. Kamala Harris talking about how, I promise you, behind the scenes, he's so active.
He solved the Rubik's Cube while he got the high score on Scrabble simultaneously. You just didn't see it.
Right.
And we did not administer a cognitive test when they did the physical. That was a big. I don't think we exactly covered that on the show, actually, but that was kind of big news.
Yeah, and then you have Bill Maher saying, lean into the age, stop trying to pretend that you're not old and this isn't an issue. Do you agree with that kind of advice? Do you think it's possible for him to lean in to something like not just age? Bernie's old. Other people are old and cognitively fit. But can you lean into this, or is this something that needs to be corrected?
Yeah, I think leaning into it's not going to work. I mean, there were 2 choices. One is, this is wrong, he can do it, he can perform in front of the cameras, and so they should actually do more interviews to demonstrate that that's the case, or it's not the case, and he can't win re-election, and they should have run a competitive primary to find somebody else. Those were the options.
Right. Well, I encourage people to listen to Ezra Klein has been catching some heat for proposing that there needs to be a convention shakeup and kind of giving voice to the voting public's fears as a pundit. The pundit class has really closed ranks historically around Joe Biden, but as a pundit giving voice to the idea that maybe there's something there and that we shouldn't keep trying to wave it away. And he did this series on his podcast talking about what it would look like to have a switch out of the convention. And I got to say, I'm increasingly believing that is what's in the works. But if the Democratic Party wants to maintain control over who is nominated at the convention, it's better able to do so without seeming undemocratic if it waits until the primaries are over. Once the primaries are over, they can say, oh gosh, shucks, we can't rerun a primary, so I guess we got to decide. As long as there's still states voting, then there's a better argument that says, well, why aren't we paying more attention to the other folks who've already thrown their hat in the ring? So I'll be watching that very closely, and I do really think that the State of the Union is going to be a real referendum on how far Joe Biden can take this.
All right, we'll have more Rising right after this.